So just very, very briefly before I hand over to Emily, what are we talking about today? I think we're really taking this cue from the UPP Civic report, where it talked about civic strategy, Civic University Agreements have to be based on an understanding of local populations, and they need to involve asking people what they want. Analysis of place and people's priorities are essential. A real sense that we have to be very, very informed, very, very consultative, very responsive in how we go about this work. So that really is what we're talking about today. And Emily's going to give us some framing comments for thinking about consultation. And then Nina from Wrexham Glyndŵr is going to talk about the co-creation approach developed at the Wrexham Glyndŵr University. Beck's then going to fill us in on ways of using data and the approach that's being taken in Birmingham with City Ready. So without further ado, Emily, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thanks, Paul, and good morning, everybody. It's really fantastic to see so many of you joining and introducing yourselves in the chat. As Paul said, I'm Emily Morrison, and I'm head of the Institute for Community Studies. We are the other strategic partner in the Civic University Network, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this workshop this morning. I just wanted to offer what will be by no means an exhaustive introduction to consultation and evidence gathering, but more of a, I suppose, a provocation as to where, sort of from our perspective, very much sitting outside the sector, where consultation and evidence gathering has sort of got to. And what I've framed it as, with my kind of provocation hat on, is from the voices of communities that we've worked with about their experience of consultation. So, as I said, it's by no means, the only voice on this at all, or the definitive voice, but hopefully it gives a few ideas or food for thought, and I'm looking forward to people's reflections and challenges on this as well. So if I just move to the next slide, and I really like this quote, and it's from one of our community advisory board, who are 14 people from across the UK, and all 4 nations who are basically a core part of our governance structure at the Institute. And it's, if 2,000 people want a pond, that doesn't tell you where to fish. And this, I think, is crucial, because naturally consultation, as Paul said, is extremely important, in terms of setting priorities, but it's very much just the first step. And what I'm here, I suppose, to encourage people to do this morning is to think about, before we enter into consultation, what it's for. Should we be doing it? Should we be doing it at this point in the process? A bit on the how, in terms of, positions and power, and who, for example, should be leading your consultation, and even a bit of a provocation as to whether consultation is even the language we should be using, or whether we should be talking more about engagement, relationships, even a form of contract that we have with our local area stakeholders and communities. And I've just put up a couple of probably extremely well-known examples to consultation on the screen there. But I think the crucial reflection from that quote is that my main reflection on all the consultations, the many consultations that I've been part of and also led, is that it can only tell you what a number or a majority of people want. It won't tell you how to intervene, and it also will not tell you where the points of agreement or contest are. And this is a crucial thing that we pick up a lot through our work, which is that the main thing around consultation is it gives you the ideas, it gives you the priorities, but we need to go one step further in terms of really understanding where the friction points are within those priorities. So if, for example, we go in and we look at a number of different themes that come out, how are we to know whether actually within that set of priorities that's come back to you from local stakeholders and communities, which would actually cause friction if they were to be put into a programme or a action plan that's part of your civic agreement? So I think this will hopefully lead very nicely into Nina and Beck's reflections on the wider scope of evidence and data gathering and co-production that is part of really excellent consultation. But I just wanted to make that point, that just because we come back with a really strong list of priorities that looks like it's led by a lot of voices from the local area doesn't mean that we understand fully where they might conflict or end up in contestation. And that's very important before we start to act or to intervene. So just another reflection from one of our previous discussions with communities, and this is from a community group in Bradford, which is you wait 20 years to be asked what you want and then 3 consultations come along at once. And I think all of us are probably familiar with the way that policy drives a lot of the interest, and certainly where we call them over-researched areas tend to come from. And we were particularly reflecting on being based in a smaller town outside Bradford, where they said, oh, you know, for a long time nobody came and asked us, and then suddenly we were part of a one of the big programs that was going to receive funding because we'd been identified as a deprived town, and as a result we had 3 consultations launched on us within the space of 3 months. And I think the reason I want to kind of reflect on this is that often people start consultation from a point of scratch. And what we are trying to encourage at the Institute, and what I know a number of others are trying to encourage now, is to really take the first step by using others' data, looking at what is already there, what has been done before, taking time to actually think about consultation is valuable, but where should it start from? What do we already know, and where can we share data so that local people, local stakeholders who are very busy and, you know, often delivering other work and services do not have to go through a repetitive process. I very much like one of the community groups that we work with, who always seek, whenever they need to go back and feel they refresh their priorities, they seek to make their survey or their methods or their focus groups shared by a number of different actors and organisations who also want to do the same thing. And what this means is you get a very rich discussion about a number of different services or activities that are happening in the local area within one group, but you also mean that that group of stakeholders and communities only has to come once. So it's a small point, but I think it's an important one to mitigate against over research, and it's part of, I think, our responsibility in good consultation. The other, I think, under the how do you start point is making the most of approaches, and there are a huge number, by no means you know, limited to those that you will come across in this session. There are a huge number of approaches that give back in the process of consultation. A couple of the ones that we use the most include peer research, which is a means of training and providing capacity for local people to be researchers, to be the consultors in their local community, and with it comes an accreditation scheme, peer mentoring, you know, sort of training and employability opportunities, and that obviously is quite a kind of intensive model. But there are a number of other approaches, and I'll touch on them a little bit further in the slide pack, that enable you to give back in the process of also receiving in terms of your intelligence. And I think that's where we get the most frustration from community groups often, is that, you know, they feel part of something in consultation, but they go away wondering what they received in return, because obviously we all know that change happens slowly, sadly, a lot of the time at local level, and it'll be a long time before they see any noticeable change, if any, from what they've been part of. Who benefits from your consultation is a crucial provocation here. So a most crucial thing to I suppose not guard against, but to be aware of, is the room is always political. So just because you have representation in the room doesn't mean that it's mitigating against, you know, the usual suspects who are often wanting to be part of consultation, and to other agendas that are in the space. I'd really like to encourage people doing consultation to think about going beyond those that volunteer to be a part of, and really seeking to engage those that perhaps do not see you know, an easy role for themselves in consultation, whether that's local group perhaps don't come readily to the table, or even groups that feel disenfranchised, or, you know, in conflict with others, and making the effort to go beyond those that volunteer, because you have to be aware then that the priorities are being set by those that feel they have the capacity, the time, or indeed another agenda for taking part. Building relationships and trust. I mean, I think one of the crucial things that I feel from consultation is that the act of actually receiving data is only a tiny part of why you do consultation, and that actually good consultation is a means of it's a democratic process that's a means of building trust. But then is it possible for that to be done as a one-off process? So a little bit of what you'll hear today is models where people have sought to build consultation as a longer term engagement throughout not just the development of civic agreements, but through how people can be a part of understanding and changing their local areas over a period of time. And I think that's a crucial thing, is that how can it be part of longer term engagement and not just one-off consultation? What are you focusing on and why? So another reflection we get a lot from communities is that they know why people have come to consult them, and it's because they know they're in the news, or an issue that's in the local area is in the news. I think just airing that and being transparent is a really crucial one, so that it doesn't look as if it's driven by an agenda that's on, has suddenly come onto the table. And a reflection that I think it also comes from our community advisory board, so I am just the messenger here, is that the unpopular policy issue is often where you can create the greatest change and indeed build trust for being willing to work on that issue. So some of the really, really important social challenges that happen in local communities that might not be at the forefront of government policy or the forefront of local government policy, or indeed things that funders are interested in, are often the ones where you can actually make an enormous difference. And you will also build trust and capital with those local stakeholders for being willing to be there and part of that at times when others were not. So I think this, may all be very, very well known to you in the room, but I just wanted to really emphasize that point. So why consult, and what is right for what stage of your agreement process? So what you have here is an adapted model of what you may all be really familiar with, the ladder of participation. But this is one that we use a lot at the Institute, and a number of the different stages in here, including around engagement. We have workshops that will follow up on specific approaches to this later on in the process. But just looking at where consultation falls on that, we characterize it under the doing for, which is particularly, that can be contested. Consultation can be way more than doing for, but it is just a sense of, are you consulting on priorities or issues that you have already decided on, or an agenda that you have already gone some way in shaping? So are you therefore there to ask people for the permission or the legitimacy to act on that plan? Or are you genuinely going into consultation with a completely open slate and engaging in order to achieve co-ownership of that strategy and agenda? And they're very different things. And I think, again, there isn't a right or wrong answer. And it also has to be what's within your capacity as an institution. But I think there's a lot of awareness, I think, in terms of what you bring into the room and where you start the conversation from, and how bottom up or open it is, will really shape kind of the purpose of the consultation results in being. And this is again another quote that came back from another of our community groups, which is, when will they stop asking us what we want and start doing? And I think this is from a particularly well-researched community that has experienced a lot of public consultation. But what it really emphasizes is not that you shouldn't do consultation. That's absolutely not the case, but that ideally there should be an added value that comes with consultation that demonstrates, and it's a great opportunity to demonstrate part of your wider resources and activity and the benefits that are brought from a university. So I've just offered a couple of examples there from ones that I know have worked really well. So consultation as public engagement, and Paul will be much better qualified to talk about this than me, but what can you build in during consultation that really demonstrates the wider richness of the work you're doing at the university and makes it accessible to the people taking part outside of the university? So, for example, does consultation need to be an exercise, or could it be a festival? Could it be arranged around a film screening? Could it be an event that actually is not framed as this is the moment we consult on our civic strategy, but is framed around raising awareness of a broader issue, which everyone can then take part in an active discussion about locally? So I've seen some fantastic examples where people have done a film screening and then made the consultation about what role the university should play in their the local environmental strategy part of the Q&A after that film screening. I think that's a fantastic model, because people are not then just coming in order to, have their say. They're coming to be part of a broader awareness raising discussion, which can be very fruitful. Consultation to intelligence. So how can, we all collect a huge amount of data in the process of consultation. Where else can that be shared, obviously with the right permissions, and integrated with other data at local level? And I know that Beck will be talking a lot about this in the presentation. And the need for sense making to continue with the local area. So we'll all be aware that not coming in to take the data and then you decide kind of what it means, just as an institution. It's very important to think about co-analysis approaches, returning for feedback at different stages during the process, to really ensure that you have understood exactly what the implications of the consultation that you've done are. And consultation to innovation. So this again is quite an intensive model, but we're seeing a move more and more to models that build in the pathway and indeed the funding towards putting whatever recommendations come back into action within the consultation. So it's not that the consultation is one milestone and at some point we'll move to the next in the future. We're seeing models that build in, sort of consultation priority setting, shaping solutions and then translating into action and innovation. And again, they do, depend on resource. They're very resource intensive. But they work best, we think, when you decide that you can't tackle and you're not going to try to address every issue at once. And I think that's the final point I wanted to make, which is there will never be, I think, a response back from a community where they say, oh, but you didn't try to tackle all of the social challenges that we have here. But what there would be is that if, we list a huge number of priorities that come out of consultation, and then we don't act on any of them. So I suppose just a kind of a sort of note on diversity and specificity being more important than trying to demonstrate value across a huge range of topics, because I think then you can really start to look at where the priorities you get back can translate into meaningful action. And thank you for listening to what is a very whistle-stop and incredibly light introduction to consultation. And thanks again for joining us here today. Paul, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. That is so helpful, I think, in framing things. I saw a comment from Rhonda asking you, is this Einstein's ladder of participation by any chance? I think you briefly mentioned that, but can you just put Rhonda's mind at ease, because she thinks she's seen this before?
Yes, it is an adapted version of the ladder of participation, yes. And I think very much in our sense of building on what others have done before, we've adapted it to think about how engagement, consultation, ownership and power work within local areas.
I'd noticed another comment from John Holford from Nottingham, who talked about the role of adult education in this. And I think just building on what Rhonda was saying and Emily about using Einstein's ladder of participation, there are so many methods and approaches to engagement, I think, that we've been using for many, many years, and being able to draw on those techniques and those methods, I think, is such a valuable approach. John, maybe you wanted to talk just a little bit about the point you were making about adult education.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Thank you, Paul. No, I enjoyed that presentation. Thank you, Emily. But one thing I would add very strongly is the importance of educational relationships with the communities that universities are part of, or should be part of. And this is something which I would attach the label adult education to. And I just make in passing the comment that, a number of years ago, universities were not too bad at this. So many universities had adult education departments which had them working with local communities, not perfectly, but in many ways doing community activity with local communities, and this gave a continual sense of engagement with those communities. I don't know, 20-25 years ago, this was deemed to be all very old-fashioned, and they were closed down. But now, of course, we're having to reinvent much the same thing through the process of what we now call community engagement, and those kinds of things. If universities could reinvent mechanisms of or institutions, units which provide adult education, those people would then be working continually with their communities, and not just occasionally parachuting in saying, what do you need from us? And then, which is a very frequent complaint from people in communities, going away again. And there is a sense that we need universities to be part of communities, not, as it were, parachuting in, doing things to them, and then going away. And I think that educational relationship with them, which in adult education is very much about dialogue, is really important.
What we want to do now is to introduce Nina. Nina Ruddell from the Wrexham Glendower University, who is going to, I think, really build on the framing that Emily gave, to talk to us particularly about how they've approached co-creation in their engagement with their partners. And one thing that Nina's done, which I think is really brave, is to go out to her partners and to ask them to feedback and to comment on what it has been like to work with the university, and to take a warts and all approach to thinking that through. So bravely, Nina is going to share with us some of those perspectives. But over to you, Nina.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thank you. And today's, I'm really excited to be in it. It builds on John's point actually around we've very definitely taken a conversational approach to our co-created mission, and not in a very sort of planned way. In a way, and this is the warts we've built up on the work we've been doing previously. So what we're going to do is share the journey we've had to date. So if I introduce myself, my name is Nina Ruddell. I'm Head of Public Policy Engagement at Wrexham Glendower University, and I love my work, and I'm very, very lucky to be in this position, because I'm privileged in that I do work with some amazing partners, building all our networks and partnerships, but actually doing some projects on the ground that make a real difference. So it feels quite, I feel in a very privileged position, although challenging, privileged. If I just introduce briefly where Wrexham is, which may help those that, we're in North East Wales. We're a very small institution of about 5,500 students. We are the top university, something we're really, really proud of, top university in England and Wales for social inclusion, which is something at the heart of what we do. And our student population is 75% of students lived in Wales before they came here, and 48% are over 30. So our students are the community in which we serve, and that's why Civic Mission is really, really at the heart of what we want to do. So if we go to the next slide, we knew that we had deeper. We know that the big issues that we're all grappling with, not just in an educational setting, but in a whole system setting, we need to understand the root causes of them all. And we knew that actually we needed to dig a lot deeper with our partners, not alone, to say we know the answer, we know this is what we're bringing to the table, actually framing things in a very different way through conversation. So that slide just really represents, I think, our whole approach to what we're trying to do. So if you just move to the next slide, what we've done then is we knew the root cause of the challenges working with lots of different partners across the region was about ending social inequality. We went out with a very audacious, big goal to say, do you know what, this is what we think we're good for, not at, which is a very different frame of conversation. So we went out and had one-to-one conversations with leaders. And it's important to say here that we are looking at the whole co-created approach as a strata. These conversations will continue. It's definitely a journey, not a destination we're getting to. And the community elements are really at the heart of this as well, which we're starting to unpick as we go along through this 10-year journey. So we're in it for the long haul. We had one-to-one conversations with leaders around, do you recognise this challenge? What role can we play within that? And how do we really work together, and how do we support each other around these 3 priority areas to really focus our collective energy to tackling this massive a challenge that we all face. So moving on to this next slide, please, Paul. I'm rattling through them because there's really interesting stuff about what partners have said about working with us. This is, and the way that we presented it is that we think we can help you with these big challenges if we focus our energy and efforts in really looking at, this is the double from the Design Council research insight, co-created, understanding the challenge, but also co-creating the solutions with communities, with leaders, and constantly talking in the right way to change what we do and how agile we are to respond to these really big, wicked issues in society. So, and we make no apology for the fact that this is big and it's really challenging and difficult, but we all want to have, you know, a part of really tackling things. Otherwise, they'll be left to future generations, and that's not what we want to do. The bottom of this, and this is the outcome that drives all of our focus, really is about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I'm sure many of you have heard about this, but it is very much the frame and the context in which we operate. It's an amazing piece of legislation. We're the first country in the world to actually legislate for sustainable development, and alongside that we have the legislation, which has 7 wellbeing goals and 5 ways of working, and they are really at the heart of what we're trying to do. So we are very much looking at the future, long-term collaboration, not about quick wins or short-term funding. This is about engaging in conversations that shape the work. Thanks, Paul, brilliant. So the shape of the work and what it looks like is we, around the 3 core priority areas, all of these projects, all of this work is not, and none of the universities sitting here going, we want to do this project because we think it's good. It's actually all about working with our partners. So the Children's University, for example, is part of our community resilience work, came from the local authority and the college and the Regional Economic Ambition Board. The community conversations are a really core part of our co-created approach, and that has been funded, and we're working alongside the strategy. It's covering across the whole of North Wales. So we're working locally and regionally where it suits partners and being agile and responsive to that. The community conversations are really key because what we're doing is working in 3 communities, really narrow and deeply to understand people's stories, to shape our civic mission, but also shape mental health services and the public services we have in the future, and looking at really rethinking that in a whole systems leadership way. Then just touching on other areas, we've got a public service lab, which is exactly what we're doing here. It's about sort of bringing everything together, learning together, space conversations for leaders, a community to support each other, but our commitment as a university to support really thoughtful and helpful work to those people that are at the coalface delivering projects to help support people in our communities that are tackling big things. And a few other things, the social prescribing, we're working with the health board on developing a whole new model for health and wellbeing moving forward, and we are striving with, again, partners to become the first university to be trauma informed and ACES informed. So, and that's at the heart of our whole community and whole society approach for North Wales as well. So next slide, Paul, please. Thank you. So this is the bit where it gets really interesting, I think, and that was a very much whistle-stop tour of what we've done, and it is challenging, and it's joyous in equal measure. There is a far lengthier version of me going through it, a deeper set of interested, which Paul will mention later, and a resource pack of all the work we've done. But this is where it gets really interesting. I've got to thank Paul for helping sort of really plant these questions in my brain. And I went out to our partners, and and what we want to do, there are a few of our partners, there are a lot more than that across the region. 2 questions, which again I think frames our discussion really about what you valued about working with us and engaging in not only our approach, the civic mission goal to end social inequality, but also the projects, because they're both the projects underpin our achievement towards the goal or the mission, and that real movement for change, and also what's not worked so well, which is often quite difficult but actually really insightful to hear. So we can whiz through the next slide then, Paul, if that's okay. So the first partner is a partner called Ashley Rogers, and again I should say that all our partners that have very kindly came back and shared their experiences have given me permission to share all of this, so it's a really important thing to Ashley was part of the North Wales Economic Ambition Board and chair of PAC, which is a community police and community trust which looks at safety in the community. And he was part of the conversations that we had both one-to-one at the beginning to look at the framework, this is our goal, but also then we hosted conversation cafes with leaders together so we could have space to exchange, and our Deputy Vice Chancellor hosted that and said, look, we've got this big goal, we don't know all the answers, but does it work for you, and how does it work, and what do we do going forward? And I think that provided, and this is where Ashley's comments came, what was valued was we were very open, but actually we also said, you know what, we haven't got the answers. We are going to get challenged because it's a really big mission that we're trying to create, but we want to secure commitment, not compliancy, to people to be with us because they want to be with us on that journey, and we all want to tackle it together rather than go, we have to sit around this table because the partnership predicts that we have to. So and then equally, I think nicely balanced to that, and it's something that's always at the forefront of my mind, is about the risk that we become too focused on the leaders of organisations, that we don't engage the hidden sort of citizens' voices, the unheard voices that we need to engage, and it's always at the forefront of my mind and something that we really want to look at. So moving forward, thanks, Paul. Then this again is a consultant from Public Health Wales. Again, we're working on a number of projects and was also part of the one-to-one conversations in the cafe. I think it's about we value the contribution of everyone, but also we're not approaching it in a traditional way. We are challenging thinking and enabling whole systems thinking, which is some of the trust we built, and I think partnership goes at the speed of trust you build, and we are really committed and deliver against what we say we're going to do, and that's built trust, but also built trust to really work in the recovery phase of COVID. I think the negatives to this, or the elements that Rachel pulled out, was the resource, and I think we can all go, do you know what, this is an area that is really important but perhaps not as resourced as it should be, and I think it's lovely that she's cared about my well-being, which is nice to hear. So on to the next one. Thanks, Paul. This is our partner within becoming a trauma-informed university from the ACES hub, supported by Welsh Government. And again, it's all about our approach within the organisation. As a key, leadership is absolutely key, and our Deputy Vice Chancellor and Vice Chancellor are absolutely backing this, and we're quite innovative. So one of the projects here is we've set up an academic development team. Academics are behind these key civic mission projects, developing them inside and externally, so that really helps. And obviously the relationships are built then as we've gone along, and we've spent a lot of time working with lots of people, building trust and relationships to work properly and engage. And the circumstances which we're working in have not really helped, but we've worked around them. And the next one, Paul, please. Thanks. This is a really interesting one for me. We are part in North Wales of a social movement called 2025, which is the bubble you can see down there, and that's to end social health inequalities across the region. And we are very much at the heart of that, and worked in lots of different ways called Just Do Teams, which is about just getting and doing work that makes the difference. And we are really now looking at the evidence underpinning that. Claire Budden is the Chief Executive of a very large housing association in North Wales, but also the Chair of 2025, and we've been at the heart of working with her for a long time, and all the partners, of which is about approximately 500 now across the region. And I think Claire is really insightful to say that it was about, she's got an affinity to this now, which really is brilliant for me to hear, and also an inclusiveness to the approach we've taken because of the nature of how we've approached it. And actually it wasn't about us saying this is a framework comment, actually shape it, because this, we don't know, we think this is it, but we know this is the root cause. I think Claire's challenges are really fair as well, and something is the proof's in the pudding, so how practically do we work together to actually drive change in that? We know we've got projects, which is the infrastructure to deliver against that, but it's also about, it's hard to touch it right now, and I think Claire's quite insightful with her views there around it. We are still carrying on with this work, but there's all our partners have got so many other things to deliver, supporting the most vulnerable members of our community. So I think it's always important to be mindful of that. And then Lindsay is Natural Resources Wales, another partner with where we're supporting the public systems, which are a really important part of Wales around the Future Generations Act, and we are really enabling and bringing together partners to work around those 7 wellbeing goals. And I think again what Lindsay echoes here is inclusiveness, the conversations, the insight and experience of everybody is important to shape that. And we've been quite open and honest to go, do you know, and this is a warts and all, and it's not perfect, but this suits our place and space in our region. But also, I think what Lindsay says is, how do we keep that alive? Those conversations, it's iterative. Conversations just don't stop. So I think it's really important to keep those conversations alive and carry on involving people into those discussions. So I think that's the viewpoints there. And then finally, the context in Wales is quite different, and we're very fortunate. And Rosie's here, who actually put all this work together for Universities Wales. I'm a deputy chair of the Civic Mission Network for Wales, and chaired by Lynette from Open University. And we very much have developed a Civic Mission framework for Wales, which was launched by the Education Minister back in last week or the week before last. We have very much shaped the focus for Civic Mission for all universities across Wales. We've shaped this together, and it very much ties all the work we do around the framework of the 7 wellbeing goals and the 5 ways of working, which is the dark grey circle. And the inner circle is the priorities that the minister set for reinventing, the challenge to universities to reinvent civic mission and get back connected to people and places in which we serve. Remember why we were set up as institutions. So I think that's very interesting. This is really about us providing a framework and a focus for civic mission, not about pigeonholing or a straitjacket, but actually really providing a framework for conversation with partners and within a university sector ourselves. And it will really track our progress against the key priority areas, but doesn't hamper the innovation either, and provides us a really great structure to deliver against that. And then it's just the final slide really is to look at there's a resource pack which is very been put together to all the work we've done. Our Civic Mission web page is live now, and for those that are interested in the Civic Mission framework for Wales, it is available. It's really accessible, really easy to understand, and happy to have a conversation. That was a very whistle-stop tour of most of my life over the last 3 or 4 years, but happy to have questions, have a discussion, and unpick things. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Nina. Amazing. And I don't know how everyone else felt, but I think just that partner feedback was so rich and so interesting, and I think affirmed many of the things that that Emily was saying in the setup. And I loved your expression, partnerships move at the speed of the trust that you build. I thought, I've never heard that before. I thought that was glorious. There've been some fantastic comments in the chat from people. Thank you very much. I think that Nick, you asked, Nick from Staffordshire asked about who led the one-to-one conversations with partners.
That's and I think it goes back to the point that Rachel Lewis, who's a public health consultant, raised, that I'm spread quite thinly, and we do set our geography as North Wales, but we set that because our partners are regional. Some are, some aren't. So we work locally when we need to, and also regionally. one-to-one conversations where we were actually going to host a dinner, and COVID, we had to rethink it all really quickly, and we hosted work with a visiting industrial fellow who's a really thought leader in systems leadership and whole systems thinking, which is some work we've been doing across the region for a long time now with loads of different partners. And we enabled a set of questions, so about 4 or 5 key questions, and 22 of the chief executives and leaders came together for a 30-minute conversation with Ken Perry, his name is, who's a visiting industrial fellow, and as a partner with us. Because so it was objective, so it wasn't us or me as a university. I work with other people and we get on really well, so it was really objective to say, how do you understand community, what are your thoughts of the university, and how do we take this forward, just really in a conversational style. And that then was brought together in a report, and I used that to start shaping the Civic University partnership strategy, to say this has all been shaped from what you're telling us, and it will constantly evolve. So hopefully that helps Nick answer that question.
Thank you, Nina. And there's lots of other comments that are coming through in chat, which we're going to capture, and we'll work with Nina to make sure we answer all of those. And in the write-up of this event, we will, for instance, Jen, your question about how does this, how does the academic development program work? You know, and I think, Laura, you were interested in how the civic work interacts with other areas of university life. So we'll address those questions and include that in the write-up. And as Nina says, there is a wonderful longer presentation to set the whole frame for the work that Nina's doing, and a resource pack that includes lots of the underpinning documentation. So again, we'll point you to that on the members area. And just finally, to comment on the comment from Claire from Birmingham about the intersectionality of civic, public and community engagement, and questions about how civic engagement and hyper-local community engagement work together. And Claire, we're going to be talking about that a lot more, I think, in the next webinar on the 23rd of February. So we'll take that as a cue for the conversation when we meet again in February. And Nina, amazing, thank you. That was just wonderful. Emily, can I pass back to you just to introduce our third speaker today?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Paul, and thank you, Nina, for a wonderful presentation. So I'm delighted to introduce Rebecca Riley, Beck Riley, from the University of Birmingham, but also from specifically the West Midlands Regional Economic Development Institute. And Beck wears multiple impressive hats, both working as a member of the policy landscape in the West Midlands, but also working as a part of the university. So I'm really thrilled that she's joined us today, and over to you, Beck.
Thank you. Let's see if I can control these. There we go. So a little bit of context. I'm Business Development Director at City Ready, and as a little bit of background, I started off life in a university doing labour market planning, in strategic planning, so very much engaged in sort of that adult education and also course planning. Went out to the policy world in RDAs and set up a regional observatory. Went then into the private sector, and I bring a lot of private sector skills to the role that I have, and then back into the university to help them set up City Ready about 5 years ago. I'm going to do a little bit of a potted history of where we are and where we've got to, and how we have engaged with our various communities, and what that has meant for our development of our research programme and also our team. So the first thing is, when we were set up, we were actually set up with some very clear impact objectives, where we had a focus on really about supporting regional policy decision making. So all of the emphasis on understanding your place and being able to fit within it and develop programs and activities that sit within that was our core action 5 years ago. So our focus was about being able to provide intelligence about the place, how to monitor and evaluate progress in terms of regional strategies or programs and interventions, including our own as a university, but also regional partners. Engaging in the region in terms of data and intelligence priorities and where you direct your regional resources. And also, I suppose the most important one is about being a proactive intelligence provider that is independent of the policy world but can inform decision making. So we're very much about understanding place. Our team itself it's very much multidisciplinary, and we've grown over the last 5 years based on funding that we've won and contribution from partners, actually. Part of this actually, and there's been a few questions about resources and capacity. And we started off, I was actually the first person appointed, so for about 6 months it was just me, but we started off with academics who want to drive impact, professional services staff such as myself who can do research, can do consultancy and understand the policy environment. And we built teams that would deliberately engage with policymakers and our different constituent communities that we work for. And we also would deliver to market. So we were delivering consultancy type work, which fit our broader objectives, but we also have an academic program. One thing that we don't do actually is teaching. We started off by mapping out who our key stakeholders. So a lot of the things that Emily and Nina have been talking about in terms of, who do we engage with, how do we engage it with them. We started out at the very beginning by doing that key stakeholder mapping, which looked at who could have influence over what we were doing and could shape it. And we also looked at who could effectively fund any of the work that we might be interested in doing and would be interested in the outputs. And we put them into a standard stakeholder mapping matrix. What we came up with is really the mayoral combined authorities, the combined authority itself, the WMCA, research funders, key regional leads, and the LEP. So that's our constituent community that we were working with. And we set up a whole program of activities that would do a lot of face-to-face relationship activity with those organisations. And then we'd have other organisations that we built strong buy-in, such as the local authorities, the other universities, and then central government. And I think I agree with Nina's comment about the partnership moving at the speed of the trust, because that's effectively the approach we took. And the main mechanism that we used for developing that trust was to establish a board. So it was one of the first things that I did when I came into post, was to think about who are those stakeholders, who are the individuals within those organisations that would be interested in our research, interested in using our skills and expertise, and that they could apply it within their strategy development or policy development or programme development. So we identified a board which actually is still in existence. The vast majority of the members that started with us are still on there. And the role of that board was to advise and guide us. It was about building collaborations and relationships. So we have 4 meetings a year. We do all sorts of sessions, which includes things like poster sessions with the whole team, so that those people can get engaged directly with our work and follow up. It involves presentations. It involves inviting them to any of our workshops and activities. But also importantly, they champion our work and they have been our best advocates. So the sort of people we have on that board are sort of lead, from the private sector, it would be the lead partner within the region. From the public sector, it's local authority chief execs or lead councillors. But the theme with all of the members is that they have an interest in research, they have an interest in strategic priorities and development, and they have an interest in effectively making a better region. And that has stood us in good stead and fed into all the other activities that we do. On a day-to-day, though, we do a lot more engagement, which is more about the day-to-day, understanding what the data requirements, what the needs are of our stakeholders, and how we might address them. So a big theme in the work that we've done has been around secondments. So I myself am on secondments of the West Midlands Combined Authority, so I do it 50-50 role. And my job there is head of research. So my job there is to scope, specify research, and support partners in developing their data and research and evaluation needs. We've also had secondments to the Cabinet Office. We've got one at the moment to the Local Industrial Strategy Council, with BAYS looking at LEPs and structures and what that means. We've had secondments in the past to organisations like Innovate UK, Smart Specialisation Hub, and we're in the process of setting one up with one of our local LEPs, again, to be a research lead within that LEP to help them scope and develop research priorities and address the issues and find out more about that local place issues that they're facing and how that feeds into strategy. So we've very much taken an approach which is probably different to the other two presenters from the point of view of it's been more about the organisations that we need to work with in order for our research to sort of influence them and they can be using it to best effect. Although we have done very direct on the ground consultation work. We were part of the Use It project within Birmingham, which looked at community researchers. We developed those community researchers, and we also work with them in terms of defining the requirements of a particular area of Birmingham. So we do both, but principally our aim more is about integration and development with our partners. We do within this structure deliver information and evidence services. For my sins, I'm the editor of a State of the Region report, and I regret doing this right at the very start, and I wish I'd have known better. But we do a weekly economic report, which was set up to monitor COVID, but we're on week 43 now, which feels like a count up to disaster in some ways. But the good thing about that is that it's created this ability to bring lots of partners together to share information, to share information, to share data, and to share, most importantly, academic research with a whole host of partners. One of the things that we did do as well was to look at what would success look like, so that we knew that we were aiming within that. So we tried to put ourselves in the shoes of our stakeholders, whether that's the mayor, regional policy maker. Because we're an economic institute, we have a particular focus on businesses. So we looked at what they would need. And again, this is where our board came in quite helpful as well to understand that. So we would have discussions with them. What do you want out of us? How can we help? And what success criteria? And we did all of that. And this actually fed quite nicely into, we put a bid into Research England, which effectively is further funding for developing these relationships and creating the impact. But it also funds an entire research program, which is looking at universities in place. So a lot of the things, then discussions and questions that have come up on here, we're actually researching quite proactively. So the role of universities in skills development, the role of universities in innovation. I'm looking at it from the point of view of role of universities within governance and institutions. And we're using the West Midlands as a sort of pilot area with the view to expanding that into other areas to do comparative studies. So that's our sort of core research program that we're looking at. And again, that builds into the work that we've been doing to do with the Industrial Strategy Council, and also it builds into I suppose one of the other things that our partners were quite keen on is this idea that if you're good at the research, the intelligence, the data, and the understanding of your place, then it's easier to make strategic cases for investment to government. And that's a big focus of what we do. So I get involved an awful lot with Treasury around the Green Book and doing business case development. And actually we offer that service internally as well. So we've got lots of multiple stakeholders that we work with, and we've gone through a process of constantly identifying and updating what their needs are, and supplementing that with the fact that we do competitively bid for work, which ultimately does directly influence activity. So just to pick up on some of the things that other people have said, is how important it is to understand your stakeholders, and to do that constant reiteration of what are their needs, and do it in a collaborative way. Because we've established the institute, which actually now includes all the universities in the region, and we're putting in place a collaboration agreement, which will allow partners to share data, research and evidence and make that relationship flow. The interesting thing is, I think, is that our partners, they value us because of our independence, and they value us because we can pull in the academic might, when actually that information, intelligence and data gathering work has been severely hampered within the current structure within the last 10 years because of austerity, etc. A lot of the skills and expertise within these organisations has been lost. So, you know, it's been a positive thing for us to be able to help to fill that gap and make the case for filling it as well. Thanks, Paul.
I've got sort of 10 minutes really to just respond to Beck's presentation, and also to sort of open up the conversation. In a minute, I was quite keen to turn to Fiona Lettice, who's a PVC for research at UEA, to talk a little bit about some of the work they've been doing about sort of gathering evidence and intelligence to inform their civic work. But maybe before I come to you, Fiona, anybody who'd like to respond to Beck's presentation, any questions that you have about her presentation? And while somebody's kind of planning to put their hand up, I might just ask you, Beck, what is a grey space? You talked about working in a grey space, and I was kind of anxious about you working in the gloom. What is a grey space?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that that's my own personal research, basically based on this idea of people that bring skills from a range of areas, and they sit sort of in this space that is neither academic, it's neither policy, and it's neither support services. So because of my weird and wonderful background, I can adapt to different areas. It means that I understand the policy world because I've worked in it. Mm-hmm. I've also worked in the sort of the private sector, and I've also worked in the university, obviously. I think the term grey space comes more from the fact that what I've done is I've identified a number of people that have hold similar roles elsewhere, and done some survey work and some interview work with them. And the term grey space comes from, I suppose it's the quadruple helix sort of application, but it's also it's the fact that often we don't have a proper job title, often we don't have a proper job description, often we don't have proper objectives, and there's just a vague, work with the place, work with policy sort of agenda, and it does have some significant issues. You don't fit in any. So that's sort of the area from, and I've been working a lot with John Goddard on his work around this about he thinks of it more of sort of adaptable people that can point in directions, and I think that's really key with consultation and so on.
Wonderful. And again, what an interesting topic that could be for us to explore in the members area. I'm sure lots of people are recognizing, even if they haven't called it a grey space. Helen, you just mentioned the idea of third space professionals. I've heard people talk about boundary spanners, people who can move across. But I think clearly to deliver this kind of civic work, people with that kind of ability to move across and understand different kind of public and professional communities and have the skills to do so, I think we're increasingly necessary, and actually addressing how we are actually able to articulate the value we create and to really give proper professional recognition for the contribution that people like yourselves are making is a challenge. I know in some universities that people feel very undervalued actually for playing the kind of role you've described. Anyone else? Andy, I'm delighted to see your hand up.
Oops. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Hi, back. Very quick question, and it's one that I think we're developing at the moment in West Yorkshire, some regional architecture. And the distance and difference between City Ready and WM Ready. I realise that WM Ready is a research focus and City Ready is the broader sort of engagement framework. Does that create any problems? Does that produce any benefits? Is there something about the different branding that helps?
Yeah, I mean, it does cause sort of some confusion because there is overlap, but I think the way the branding works for us is City Ready is very much the University of Birmingham. So it's very much about consultancy work that we may do. It's how we were set up originally. And whereas WM Ready is about the collaboration. So that work involves Aston, BCU. We're working towards Warwick, Coventry, and Wolverhampton joining as well. So that it's more of a networked approach with a network service. So I think that's the main distinction. But it is an interesting problem in the sense of we were already set up and doing this sort of activity, but what we've done now is expanded and created a much wider network and cover a much wider geography. Really.
Oh, that's kind. Thanks. It'd be nice to have a conversation again with you, maybe off in another time, because I think we might in West Yorkshire have some of those issues where we are as well. But thanks for that, Paul. Are the slides going to be provided, by the way? Because the presentations are great.
Yeah. They are, aren't they? Yeah, absolutely. And I think I will also ask the presenters to also give us some additional links, and if there are other documents that they think you'd appreciate looking at, we'll make sure we include those. I just think, isn't it interesting looking across the presentations and the feedback today about the rigor with which people have approached their consultation and evidence gathering, and back just seeing those approaches that you've used, the stakeholder mapping, the needs analysis, how you define those sort of success criteria for different partners, and then Nina's approach and how they've used that sort of design council methodology, and Emily setting that frame at the beginning for rigor in consultation. I just think that all of these tools we'll make sure that we provide links to. I think another thing I just wanted to briefly talk about is the way that some universities are sort of creating sort of reports and sort of intelligence about their I guess their civic impact, and doing sort of quite systematic evidence gathering about that. And Fiona at UEA, I wondered if you would mind just giving us a quick overview of what you've been doing in terms of producing an impact report for UEA.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, so about 5 or 6 years ago, we did a purely economic analysis of the university in terms of its impact on Norwich, Norfolk, and further afield. And we felt that needed to be independent, so we partnered with U4 Consulting. And then obviously that gets out of date and we felt we should refresh it. So in 2018-19, we thought, well, we'll do another economic analysis, but actually we felt it would be interesting to broaden it out and consider our civic impact as well. So that was a sort of conscious decision to broaden out and understand the university's impact beyond just the economic. So that report really served two purposes for us. I think the first was about, as I said, partnering so that we got some real independent data quantitatively about some of the work that we were doing and the impact of our students on the region and so on. But also we wanted to sort of tell some stories about the really interesting civic projects that were going on across the university and with a range of different partners. We took quite a storytelling approach to that. And then obviously we had a lot of the data and the stories gathered, and it was, well, how do we present that? And we decided to actually go with a fairly glossy brochure because we wanted to somehow celebrate the work very strongly and make sure that obviously the people that were involved in that had something that they could share with their colleagues We launched the report in an event in Norwich Castle, so we definitely wanted to be in the city. UEA sits just outside the city, a few miles outside the city, so it was a very conscious effort to get into the city and have a civic event to launch the report as well. So it brought people together that had worked on the projects, but also some of the partners that people have talked about this morning, the LEPs, local sort of decision makers and policy makers, local businesses, and other partners that, as I said, we worked with. The data that we collected through this process has helped to underpin our various excellence framework submissions, so the TEF, the REF, the KEF, and so on. So it's been very useful to be able to provide evidence of some of the work that UEA has done with sort of, quantifiable numbers, helped to sort of bolster some of those submissions. So it's used quite extensively in different ways, and ways that we didn't envisage when we put the report together either. I think, Paul, also you just wanted me to say a few words as well about our approach to the Civic University Agreement. So we pledged to do the Civic University Agreement last summer in 2020, after the pandemic was underway, and we'd hoped to make more progress than we've made to date. We've struggled a little bit, I think, internally with the capacity, as we've tried to pivot to online teaching and learning models and blended approaches and all the changes with different tiers and lockdowns and so on. And we felt that we didn't really have the capacity to do the sort of more formal aspects of the agreement effectively with our internal resources, but also our external partners are obviously quite impacted by the pandemic as well. And we did truly want to co-create the agreement. So we felt that the time wasn't quite right to do some of those conversations, and that people might not have the headspace to look to the future. Everybody's quite focused with just how surviving the now, really. And actually, I'm quite glad in a way, because today's presentations have been really, really thought-provoking and helpful. I liked what Emily said about managing the expectations around the pace of change that you can expect once you've done some of that conversational work initially. I like Nina's context and framework at the end of the presentation there, and certainly, we've got Norwich 2040 vision, and we've got LEP strategies and goals. So I think we could probably construct quite a nice framework to help as well. So I did like that from Nina's presentation, and from Beck's presentation, the grid. I think trying to think about success from different perspectives as well will be really useful for us. So actually, I think I'm probably glad we haven't gone too far down that process, because today's certainly given a lot of food for thought. And I know my colleague Ben's also on the call today as well. So I think we'll take a lot away from today to chew over our approach. And we're hoping that, if lockdown 3 works and and the vaccinations, and we start to pull out of the pandemic, that there'll be a bit more headspace to do this in the way that we truly want to do it, a real co-creation, co-conversation approach to developing the agreement and our next steps in this journey. So hopefully from summer onwards, that's more possible.
Fiona, that is so wonderful, because I think it can feel quite intimidating sometimes to see other universities sort of racing ahead with some of this work. But I think, just respecting the fact that this has been such a difficult time for all of us, and actually your approach and the fact that you are actually having a little bit more time to sort of really think through, making a virtue of that, that's really, really helpful. So thank you so much. Emily, I might just hand back to you before we sort of begin to wrap up the session. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you, Fiona, as well, for those brilliant comments and reflections. I think for me, what really the suite of the different presentations demonstrates is a point that we really want to emphasise in terms of as you're looking to build your civic agreements or on the journey, which is this point around diversity, and that not all civic agreements need to look the same. We're here very much as partners in the network to help to construct and to facilitate and to sort of dream about what those could look like and turn them into action. But that there are so many ways of being a civic and of forming that agreement, and they range from the approach that Beck's taken of looking at sort of how can the university deliver really fantastic, rigorous data, accessible data in a very different time frame, weekly, which is so daunting, you know, to provide different groups and stakeholders with what they need to make decisions. And then a completely different approach by Nina, you know, sort of looking at how can you co-produce towards a really ambitious and very inspiring kind of longer term challenge to end inequality in Wales in 2030. And the diversity there, I think, is key, that we, you know, civic agreements don't have to look the same, and really finding that that edge or that kind of USP to your approach to being civic is what we really want to encourage and emphasize, because we're such a diverse sector, and often we are wrongly you know, seen as a very kind of, you know, like on like group, and actually there's so much diversity that needs to be communicated, and it's that diversity that really makes a difference to local areas and to local communities. So thank you so much, and also thank you for all the really fantastic comments, questions and reflections you've been sharing in the chat window.